everyone. Welcome in. We are so excited to have you this afternoon or evening, depending where you are located. I am so honored to be here for another year with my incredible colleague, Stacey Callop, to cover the AP Math webinar exams. She is an expert teacher of ours. We are honored to have her here tonight, working with LSAT, MCAT, physics, AP, STEM exams, and more, here to share her wealth of knowledge with us. So Stacey, welcome, and thanks for being here.
Well, thank you for attending, everybody. I hope to give you a little bit of insight into the AP math exams that are going to occur in May of 2026. And please feel free if you've got questions to type them into the um, text box, and Anna will let me know that you have a question, and I will attempt to answer them or ask you to hang on. We're going to have a question session at the end. My intent is to take us for about 45 minutes, talk about the tests, and then give you guys a good 15 minutes or so, or as long as you have questions, to answer any questions that you have and go from there. So let's get started today. We're going to talk about the math AP exams. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to give you a brief summary in terms of what's our menu for this evening in terms of I'm going to start just talking about why would anybody want to take AP exams. Then we're going to go second main topic is understanding the exams themselves, specifically the four math exams, what they are about, what's in them, and how the tests themselves are structured. And then the third thing we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about some of the strategies that you can use and that we teach here at Princeton Review and Tutor.com in terms of to prepare for the exams and how should I approach these exams. All right, we believe that you absolutely can work on your test scores and improve them. And so we want to be here to help you and indicate to you how you can do that. So let's start with why should I take some AP exams? The main reason to take AP exams is to essentially earn credit for a certain college course. And the way that we do that with AP exams is most schools will give you credit for a course if you get a 3 or higher on your AP exam. All right, if you only get a 1 or 2, most schools will require you to retake that course as part of your, course load that you have to take while at the school. Most of what people are using the AP exams for is to place out of and move beyond what we call the introductory or required courses. So if I want to be a bio major, I kind of want to get to my harder in-depth courses sooner. So I'd like to get out of, Bio 101 or basic bio. And if I can take it in high school and do an AP exam and I get 3, 4, or 5, then I can usually not have to take Bio 101 in college and I can go straight to the next course after it. And the college will agree that I have the requirements and the prerequisites to move on to the second course. All right, so we want to get rid of those introductory classes and get into those more in-depth courses related to my major. And this way I can potentially graduate maybe a semester or two faster. All right. Please remember the one thing I always like to remind people, every college has a requirement for how many credits you have to take in residence at that college in order to get a degree. So there's a certain number of courses you have to take at the college, but most of the time, APs can help you get rid of these introductory courses and move on to the harder, more in-depth courses. That's the way most people tend to use their AP exams. All right, so let's talk about the dates. This year for 2026, AP exams are the first and second week of May. And as you can see, there's 4 AP math exams. We have statistics occurring on Thursday, May 7th, and you notice it says 12 p.m. local. So one of the things that happens is AP exams are scheduled to start at either 8 in the morning local time or 12 p.m. local time. And so we like to give you this, is this a morning 8 a.m. exam or is this a 12 p.m. afternoon exam? We have statistics on Thursday the 7th, and then both calculus AB, calculus BC, and pre-calculus are the following week. Please also note calculus AB and calculus BC are offered on the same date at the same time. All right. College Board, the people who make the AP exams and the people who write the SAT exam, assume you are not qualified to take calculus AB and calculus BC in the same year. All right, so they always pretty much schedule those tests on the same days. If for some reason there's a reason why you should be taking both of those exams on the same in the same year, talk to all AP exams are offered through a school, and usually there's someone at the school that manages the administration of AP exams. So if for some reason you're like, wait, I'm supposed to take both of these, they're both scheduled at the same date and time, talk to the person who's in charge of the scheduling. There's arrangements for potentially scheduling a later test date for folks that have conflicts or things like that. But that's in sort of very unique cases, right? So again, calculus A, B, and BC are both the morning of the 11th, and pre-calculus is Tuesday the 12th in the morning. Again, assumed you're not taking pre-calculus and calculus 2, calculus A, B, or BC, but all right, those are not scheduled on the same date. So the one thing that I also want to be clear about is if you notice, it's 8 a.m. local. So if I'm here, if I live on the East Coast, so if I'm in New York taking an exam, I start at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time or Eastern Daylight Time, depending on what it is in May. If I live in California, I start at 8 a.m. Pacific Standard or Daylight Time. So somebody could be starting their test in California after somebody has finished the test on the East Coast. So that's one of the reasons why generally there's several different versions of the exam managed on the day that these exams are offered and they're sent out to specific different places. They don't want students to have the ability to be able to, have somebody from New York call their friend in California and say, "Oh, for the multiple choice, ABC, ABD, and give you a bunch of letters and you can go write them in." The tests are usually very similar, but a lot of times they'll rearrange questions so that you can't just literally get the letters from somebody who may have taken an earlier exam. Right, so those are the 4 exams and their dates this year. You can see the different scores available for an AP exam, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. All right. 5 means they believe you're extremely well qualified, you've met the criteria, it seems like you know the material well, college equivalent of getting an A or an A plus. A 4 is considered again to be very well qualified, which means B, B plus, or A minus. And then 3 qualified is considered to be the equivalent of a C, C plus, or B minus. So the 1 and the 2 are basically the assessment that if you were taking this course at college, you would have received lower than a C, which is the reason that most schools will not accept a 1 or a 2 as evidence that they should allow you to place out of the course and move on to the course after it. So they will generally require you to take the course there as part of the basic structure and your requirements. So that's the basic sort of why would I take an AP? So that's our first part of the menu. Now let's talk about the AP math exams. We've got 4 of them. We want to kind of break them down and talk about what's on the different exams, How are they structured? So this way, for folks that are not familiar with and haven't seen a fair amount of the exams, what's in it? What are they asking me to do? All right. So initially, we're back on the same topic. In fact, the purpose of the exams is to show that you know material and are demonstrating a competence as if you had taken this course at the college level. All right, so that's the purpose of taking the test. I know enough, I learned enough in this course in my high school or where I took it that it's just as good as any course that would be taught at the college level. All right, so that's your job on the exam. Demonstrate competence. Let's talk about calculus AB. All right, so the topics on calculus AB should look very familiar to folks that are familiar with calculus, limits, differentiation, applications of differentiation, integrate a little bit of integration, differential equations, integration applications. All right, so this is a standard AB calculus um, content and curricula. What I want to point out is as I go to calculus BC, let's talk about what's the difference. All right, so with BC, we still have limits and continuity, we still have differentiation. Notice all of a sudden, we still have composite, implicit, inverse, definitions, fundamental. These are the same. These are all the same so far. All right, analytical applications the same. Integration and accumulation of change the same. That's in AB. Differential equations is also in AB. Applications of integration also in AB. So far, this is similar content as in AB. This is not similar content. So this is now the difference between calculus BC and calculus AB. Parametric equations, polar coordinates, vector functions is in BC. It is not in AB. Infinite sequences and series is in BC. It is not in AB. All right. So in the list, from a content perspective, the two content areas that are in BC but not in AB are the bottom two. Parametric equations, polar coordinates, vector valued functions, and infinite sequences and series. The other thing that's different between the two tests is the distribution of how much of the content is tested. BC emphasizes a little bit more on the integration and accumulation of change, differential equations, applications of integration. Right? You'll see a little bit more there in BC. So the percent of the content tested in each of them, even though they have similar bullets, is not exactly the same. There's not the same distribution of content in them also. All right, from a pre-calculus standpoint, polynomial rational functions, exponential and logarithmic functions, trig and polar functions. And we're talking, I want to be really specific because I mentioned polar coordinates when I said calculus BC. Polar functions are much more simple. All right, that's not the same as polar coordinates. All right, so pre-calc is pretty standard pre-calc curriculum. All right, this is standard content for any pre-calc textbook.
Hi, Stacey. We've had a couple of questions come in that I'd like to answer live for everybody. So the
Sure.
first is going to be, so are the AB and BC calculus courses identical except for that one unit? What are the key differences there?
The key differences is the BC is a much harder content test than AB. So please, if you're doing calculus, talk to your teacher. AB versus BC, most people should be taking AB, not BC. BC is what I would call slightly advanced for high school classes. So most students do much better on the AB exam than they do on the BC exam. But my recommendation to everybody is talk to your teacher and also take a practice of each test because once you get into that BC test, it's a much harder exam. Are you comfortable enough with the level of detail and the material on the exam? Because most high school students are not.
Great, thank you, Stacy. And then for all of these exams, does getting a 5 mean that the student has gotten everything correct on the exam, or what's the cutoff for a 5?
No, you can actually get a couple wrong for a 5. It The cutoff is set during the marking period after the exam. So there's a rough measure where they know um, roughly, we think maybe 5 wrong is max for a 5, or that it's a couple wrong. But what happens is the teachers all gather together to mark the exams in a common location so that two people look at every exam. And if the two teachers have, there's a differential in terms of how far their grades can vary. If they vary more than like a grade and a half, then an overseer comes in and takes a look at the exam. So there's a very rigorous process in place to make sure that the students are getting fairly graded. But to get a 5, you do not need to have a perfect score. You can't have that many wrong, but we as the community don't know what that is until all the teachers sit down and start grading the papers. And then they look at the distribution of scores and say, okay, 5's here. They come in thinking they know where it is, but then adjust it slightly once they have all the actual numbers.
Great, thank you, Stacy. And those are our questions for now.
Okay, great. All right, so let's continue on to the fourth and final AP math exam, which is statistics. Some people prefer statistics as a course and don't like calculus or pre-calculus. There's nothing wrong with that. So you can do statistics, especially if you want to go into science. And, statistics is very important for hypotheses and hypothesis testing in science. This is something that if you're going to be doing research, everybody needs to be well based in statistics. So this is possibly a course that some might appeal to some people. We're looking at variation and distribution. We're looking at patterns and uncertainty. We're looking at predictions, decisions, conclusions. So this is all about means and mean distributions and chi-square distributions and different ways to take data, to look at it, to put hypotheses forward, to test hypotheses. All right, so some people find statistics to be on the edge of math and social science, but there's still a fair amount of math in this course. But some people feel it's a little bit more logical than something like calculus. All right, different people have different preferences. There's nothing wrong with that. So this could be an option for somebody that really disliked working with integrals and differentiation and just felt that some of that stuff didn't make a lot of sense to them. They took pre-calc, they did okay. They don't really want to go on to calculus. What can I do? AP statistics might be an option for you. All right, let's talk about the exam structure. How is each of the exams set up? And I want to be really specific about the exams because they're kind of complicated. And I want to be really clear about a couple things. I'm going to start actually on the right side of the screen with statistics. Statistics is the easiest exam to describe its structure. It's divided into two sections, just like the science exams. Section 1 is the multiple choice exam. Section 2 is the free response exam. There are 40 questions in section 1 in the multiple choice. You have an hour and 30 minutes. It's 50% of the test. Section 2, we consider to be the free response question. Those are the ones where you have to justify your answers, show your work, write them out. So those are ones we always want to practice to make sure we're giving full answers and justifications for I used this calculation. What did the question ask me for? I got to be really careful to make sure I answer the parts of the question. And a lot of times, those free response questions all have multiple parts to them. It could be going from A through C, D, or E. All right. They can be three, four, or five parts. We just got to make sure we read everything carefully and answer the question that's asked. If I'm not sure about a certain part, I skip it, kind of circle it on my test, but maybe just come back and write an equation if I can think of anything to write down. So that's the statistics. All right. Statistics is structured like the science AP exams. Calculus AB, Calculus BC, and pre-calculus are structured differently. I'm going to start with an overview. Then I'm going to go to a second slide and kind of expound a little bit because each of the sections, section 1 and section 2, are broken down into two parts. So for calculus AB, there are not 45, there's 40, no, 40 questions in pre-calc, 45 questions in AB. So AB and BC have the same basic structure. You get 45 questions in section 1. You get 45. Yeah, they both have 45. That 1 hour should be an hour and 30 minutes. They both have an hour and 30 minutes. Nope, it's an hour and 45 for Calc AB and it's an hour and 30 for BC. And then they each have 6 free response questions, and then we're going to divide them up. All right. Both of them, 50% of the test, A, B, and BC, 50% of the test multiple choice, 50% of the test free response. All right, so we want to make sure the times are about equal. So we're like, okay, half the test is multiple choice, half the test is free response. If you notice from the pre-calculus structure puts a much higher emphasis on the multiple choice questions. The multiple choice questions are more than 50% of the test. As a result, they're also more time-wise. So for pre-calc, right, we get 2 full hours in the multiple choice questions, even though there's only 40 of them, all right, because it's more than half the test. The free response is only 4 questions, and as a result, we only have an hour to do both of those 4 questions. What I want to talk about is how section 1 and section 2 are each subdivided. All right. So let's talk for a second about each section is subdivided. All right. So let's take the AB. Now, the good news is, again, calculus AB and calculus BC have the same structure. All right. So they both have, if you notice, the first 2 rows are section 1. Notice how the first 30 multiple choice questions, we get an hour. So we get about 2 minutes per question. All right. And notice how a calculator is not permitted. The second part of section 1, part B, you get 15 multiple choice questions. Notice how you have 45 minutes for these 15. So of those total 45 questions in section 1, we divide it up by 2/3 of the questions are not allowed calculator. And then part B, it's not that the calculator is just allowed, but a graphing calculator is actually required. So if they require me to bring a graphing calculator to the test, all right, this is something that they're usually very strict about in terms of everybody does the 60 minutes. We want to make sure nobody's got calculators out. Then after the 60 minutes for part A in section 1, then We let everybody bring their calculator out for 45 minutes to do part B of section one. Anna, question?
Yeah, we had a question come in. Is a calculator provided in the exam, or what calculators are students required to bring?
For the calculus exams, you are required to bring a graphing calculator. And as of right now, they are not provided. We're hoping that AP and College Board starts providing the Desmos calculator that they do in the SAT. The intent, I believe, is for them to get to the point to provide the calculator so that no one is hurt or hindered because, they have a better calculator than somebody else. Right now, everybody needs to bring their own. And so you're required to have a graphing calculator. So it's not just allowed, but a graphing calculator is actually required. So you want to get a full up because these Part B, Section 1 multiple choice questions are pretty difficult. So, and that's why you have 45 minutes for only 15 questions because I have to use the calculator to sort through them. I can't kind of piece through it and do well enough without that calculator. All right. And then if you notice for section two, we also have a part A and a part B. And some of the free response questions do the same thing that they do with the multiple choice. Anna, question?
Yeah, we have a couple separate students that have followed up asking if the Desmos calculator is provided on the exam or if it's built in. Do you know if maybe that's a change that is coming this year
I
officially?
do not believe that's a change coming this year.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
I'm going to double check on that. If you guys will give me a minute at the end of the presentation, I want to double check on that. But right now, they are not quoting the Desmos calculator as available to all students. And just to give you guys a heads up, there is a change coming potentially next year or the year after. So we need to keep our ears to the ground. They're going to be modifying the statistics AP exam. Not for this year. Not it will the 2026 exam will be just like we've talked about so far, but there's an indication that for the 2026 to 2027 school year, which is the 2027 AP exams, they are going to be modifying the structure of the statistics exam. Another question, Anna?
Yeah, it looks like we had it come in that the calculator is provided, and then I'll put the link in the larger chat so we can all review and make sure that for each of the students taking the exams, I would just double check as well that it's available for your exam and not a couple of exams, but not yours.
Because that's one of the things really want to double check on because I don't want to tell everybody it's available to them if I'm not 100% certain of it.
Absolutely.
The other thing that has to be true is if the students are taking their test at the college or at their school, we got to make sure your school has the Desmos calculator as part of the content for the AP exam. So that needs to be loaded on the computers or it needs to be loaded on people's computers that are taking the test. All right, so that's one of the things that we have to be careful with because that's something that they can't hand it to you in paper with the exam. All right. So does does it make sense, guys, what I said about the part A and part B under each of the two sections? All right. Part A and part B are can you use a calculator in this part of the exam? Each of the two sections, multiple choice being section one, free response being section two, each of them has a part where you cannot use your calculator and a part where you're actually required to be using a graphing calculator. All right. And they kind of flip them because section one, part A, you start two-thirds of section one, the multiple choice, no calculator allowed. The last 45 minutes, you need your graphing calculator. In section two, part A, the first two free response questions, you can use your calculator. But on the last four free response questions, no calculator allowed. All right. And again, time-wise, they have different amounts of the ones without the calculator are usually the longer time periods. All right. 30 versus 60 in the second part, 60 versus 45 in the first part. Both A, B, and B, C have the same basic structure. And then pre-calc has a slightly different structure. All right. Because remember, pre-calc, I want to go back. Pre-calc had 40 questions in the multiple choice. So the way those 2 hours is broken up in those 40 questions is the first 28 questions are no calculator and you have 80 minutes. The last 12 multiple choice questions, you have 40 minutes and a graphing calculator is required. In the free response, you notice that for pre-calc, there's only 4 questions. So section two is broken up into two parts, A and B, and they're both 30 minutes long because they're both 2 questions long. So section two, part A is 2 questions. I have a graphing calculator required, and I have 30 minutes. Section two, part B, I have 2 questions. No calculator is allowed, and I also have 30 minutes. So that's kind of split down. We got 1 hour for 4 questions. You got 30 minutes for each set of two of them with calculator, two of them without calculator. All right. So does that make sense, guys, in terms of these are a little bit more complicated in how the structure is divided up than the science exams because of when am I using my calculator versus when am I not using my calculator? All right. So thumbs up. We all good with the structure of the exam? All right. Let's go to some kind of core strategies on what can I do when I'm preparing for this exam. Some of the strategies we like to teach our students and work with them on. All right. So, okay. So no, let me tell you what this is supposed to look like. All right. On the left side where it says scores higher, you're supposed to see one sort of column of letters colored in. On the scores lower, you're supposed to see something that we call like a Christmas tree, where you go sort of A in the first row, B in the second row, C in the third row, D in the fourth row, and then you go back C, B, A, B, C. The the issue is here. What we want you to do is we want you to take this test in a very specific way that we're going to talk about in a couple slides. We want you to do what we call a two-pass system on the test. We want you, if you're taking, the section one, part A, I want to go through those questions that are in that part, and I want to do all the questions I know how to do first. If I come to a question I'm not so sure about, I'm going to kind of circle it on my test booklet and skip over it. And the reason I want to do that is that I want to get the maximum number of points I can. So I always want to do the questions that I know how to do first. If I'm not sure about a question, I call it a later question. All right. I have now questions that I want to absolutely do now because when I read it, I know exactly what I need to do to solve it. If I look at a question, I read it, and I'm not sure what I need to do to solve it, I'm going to call it a later question. I'm going to put a circle around it. I'm going to come back to it after I've gone through all the questions in this current time period and done the ones I clearly know how to do, got the points I know how to do. Now let's start working on the points I'm not as sure about. Then, when I have about, 5 minutes left on the test, here comes the whole what should I do to fill in the ones that I either don't understand or didn't get to or whatever we've got. We want you to make sure you color in an answer for every question. The way the grading goes, you are not penalized for having a wrong answer. Your score is only based on the questions you get right. There's no subtraction or anything for what you got wrong. So I always want to put an answer in. If I'm down to the very end of my test and just kind of going through the things that are unanswered, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time, trying to think through answers if I don't know what to do with the question. Clearly, if you look at an answer and can eliminate anything, don't choose that one. But if you're not sure what to do, what we say is pick a letter of the day. If today is, Tuesday, maybe today's a B day. Anything that I don't know what to put an answer in, I'm going to put a B in. And the reason we do that is it doesn't spend a lot of time. You have roughly a 25% chance of getting it right. So let's make sure we get an answer in everything than thinking too hard about, drawing little Christmas trees or little pictures in the row. Let's just make sure we get an answer in everything. I got a 25% chance of getting it right. All right. So make sure you get an answer in every question, even if you're just randomly guessing a letter. Like I said, we want you to do the two-pass system. We want you to do the questions you know how to do initially. Get through everything you know how to do. Get all the points that you know how to work. I want to maximize my points on this test. I don't want to get stuck, if I have 28 questions I'm doing in the first section with no calculator, I don't want to get stuck on question 14 and run out of time if I know how to do questions 25, 26, 27, 28. All right, if I get caught up and spend too much time on one of them, I don't want to miss anything that I knew how to do. So that's why we have the two-pass system. Make sure you've done the questions you know how to do. Then, circle the ones as you look at it and go, I'm really not sure what to do with this question. Put a circle around it, come back to it later. All right, get through everything that you're currently allowed to touch, then go back and deal with the ones you're not sure what to do with. The other thing that we like to talk about is we want you to be really careful when you're bubbling in the answer choices. If you're skipping a question and you're like, okay, I don't know what to do with this one, make sure you don't forget to skip the bubble on that line if you're bubbling in answers as you go. One of the things we tell folks is one of the things you can do to avoid this issue is don't bubble in answers on your answer sheet till like 5 minutes left on the test or 10 minutes left on the test. And that gets some of us a little nervous. So maybe instead of waiting till 10 minutes left on the test, one of the things I can do is I'm going to do 2 pages in my test book. And then before I turn the page, of the 2 pages that I've done, let me grid in those answers and color in the dots for those guys, making sure I skip the right rows. So there's, a certain number of questions there. I'll flip the page. I'll do 2 more, left and right side of the pages, and I'll go grid those in. All right. I don't want to grid in after every question. That tends to be a little time consuming, and we think that that's a little bit of a waste of time. All right. The other strategy that we like to push a lot is one we call process of elimination. And the reason we think process of elimination is a great strategy is I find when I'm looking at a question with 4 answers, sometimes I might look at the answers and say, well, it could be A or it could be B. I'm not certain which one of these is the right answer. It could be either one of them, but I know it's not C and D. Sometimes it's easier to say, okay, let's get rid of the answers that I know are clearly wrong. All right, so I know it's not C and D. I now have a 50-50 chance of selecting between A and B. Can I now find something wrong with answer A or B for a reason to eliminate one of those answers? All right, so an example that we have here is we have a question asking for what's the capital of Malawi. And I'll tell you, I don't know. Off the top of my head, I have no idea what the capital of Malawi is. But look at the answer choices. I know it's not Paris, so it's not A. I know it's not London, so it's not B. And I know it's not Amsterdam. Those are all capitals of countries in Europe. So it can't be A, it can't be B, and it can't be C, which basically leaves me only one possible answer choice. And that's how process of elimination works. If I can find reasons for why two or three of those answers are wrong answers, I can narrow my scope and say, okay, let's see what's left. What can I potentially get rid of? All right. All right. So when in doubt, Anna, got a question?
Yeah, we do. So with the tests kind of moving between different sections, are there breaks between those tests or is it a straight transition?
It's pretty much a straight transition. Um, sometimes they'll allow you a 10-minute break between section one and section two. Some schools will say, hey, everybody, if you got to go to the bathroom and stuff, but technically it's supposed to be sort of, a full up one hit, off you go with the timing. So if your school gives you a break, accept it, be happy about it, but don't expect that they're going to do that. All right? They do not have to do that. All right? It's not built into the test like it is with the SAT. All right? So process of elimination is basically about identifying something wrong with an answer. Can I find something wrong with this answer so I can eliminate it? Notice the third bullet that says half wrong equals all wrong. Has anybody noticed that a lot of times, especially SAT type answers, tend to be we get some of these really long answer choices that are like 3 or 4 lines long, and we have to stop for a second and we have to kind of read through the answer choice. And a lot of times it kind of comes in two parts. It has kind of a front part of the answer and then it has a back part of the answer. But that's something that College Board is very good at doing to try to trick us into the wrong answer choices. Make sure you read every word in that answer choice. If there is one wrong word in that answer choice, that answer is wrong. It can't be mostly right except for one or two words. All right. It has to be 100% correct, all words 100% correct. So if you find one word being irrelevant or wrong reference, out goes the answer choice. All right. Let's talk briefly about free response questions. All right. Multiple choice, we said we want you to do the two pass. Get the questions done you know how to do. That applies to free response. But free response is more of a I have to show my work and I have to clearly answer the questions. So I have to explain, potentially justify sort of why do I think this question is correct. Make sure most of those answers should be a couple lines long. If you find you're writing, 10 or 12 lines, you got too much. These are not meant to be long paragraphs. They're meant to be a couple lines of math derivation or a short explanation as to why this is the right equation to use or why I'm going to make a certain change to a certain equation or derive a certain equation. Make sure you read the whole question carefully. Make sure you note all the parts of the question. Is it A, B, C? Is it A, B, C, D? Is it A, B, C, D, E? If I'm having trouble with one of the parts, move on, finish the rest of the parts, and then, put a circle around it or come back to that part and say, okay, what could I write here? Is there a certain equation I think associated with this if I'm not sure what to write? Can I write down a certain equation or basic definition that might apply here? All right. So, like we said, free response questions, part B. All right. You've got the part where you can use your calculator. You got the part where you can't use your calculator. You can see in this one example question how it's got parts A through D. They've given me a function. They've given me a second function. We've got one function, how passengers leave a subway at a certain function f of t. Then I've got g of t, which tells me how they board. And now they're going to start asking me questions about these functions. All right. And the first question says we're taking time from 0 to 20. How many passengers leave the subway? Well, leaving the subway is modeled by function f of t. All right. And I have to just literally notice in B, they're going to ask me to take a derivative. So I need to just be very, very careful. I need to read the question and make sure I'm reading all the details so that I answer all of the question. All right. I want to maximize my points again. So I want to try to make sure I answer the questions carefully. All right. That pretty much takes us to our discussion today. All right. Hang on a second. Let me finish up with our last slide here.
And then one last question, Stacey, before we go to the final slide. For that last example question, would a calculator be allowed on that type of problem or not?
I'm trying to think. That was question number 2. And on question 2, if we're on, I think that was AB, question 2, that would probably be a calculator required question.
Great.
So you would be able to do the manipulation of the numbers on the calculator. All right. So best way to do well in the AP exam is know your content. All right. But there's still standardized tests, even though they're very specific standardized tests because they're specific content, specific curricula. Some of the things we apply to SATs and other standardized tests also work on IP exams because you've got multiple choice section versus free response section. All right, so those kinds of things still apply. And then we'll hit the questions. Anna, got anything for us?
Nothing else in the chat currently, but we'll be able to stay for another 12 minutes or so. So if you do have a question about anything covered today or maybe another lingering question, feel free to